I'm Professor Falvey, an Emeritus Professor at the University of Melbourne, associated with various universities in Asia, and I've spent most of my career research and development in international agriculture. Let me begin by talking about shifting agriculture as a subject in itself. It's usually discussed negatively as a primitive form of agriculture that will disappear from the earth over time, that we have developed a more sophisticated agriculture. So rather than characterising shifting cultivation as a group of people who cut down forests, grow a crop, exhaust the soil, move on and do it elsewhere, let's see it in the context of history, firstly, and then in the context of feeding ourselves. So the common way of viewing this, which I'm suggesting is not quite correct, is that hunters and gatherers was an early form of feeding ourselves. Then it moved to nomads and pastoralists, then to shifting cultivators, then to sedentary agriculture, what we know today, and then to forestry, remedying some of the excesses of agriculture, and then to catchment and nature reserves that preserve other areas and make up for the excesses of monoculture in agriculture. This is the way many people view the world. It is not correct. If we look at it the way the diagram presents it, you'll see that nomads and pastoralists persist today, that shifting cultivation continues today, and of course monoculture, sedentary agriculture continues. Forestry and catchment and nature reserves are sort of recent innovations that go on into the future. Yes, they are ways we understand nature better and our place as part of nature, but they are not a solution to a problem. They are an understanding of how we have created problems by not applying the knowledge we had in the past. Some of that knowledge was with shifting cultivators. Another way of seeing shifted cultivation is presented in these two diagrams. The diagram on the left is the conventional diagram that represents shifting cultivation as a cycle with roughly equal periods of time between cutting down the forest and burning it, growing an annual crop and having some animals, and then in a second cycle after that using the plots again, letting forest regrow, and then having a fallow period before cutting down that forest again. That diagram, commonly used throughout the world by the eponymous Dubois, is perhaps not representing the time frames properly, so the diagram on the right seeks to correct that and simply show that the period between the fallow and the cutting and burning was an extremely long period when a lot of forest regrew. This has huge implications environmentally, in nutritional terms for the soil microbiome, and for the quality of the crops grown. It also meant a very good lifestyle for the shifting cultivators compared to those who were sedentary farmers in earlier eras. That's a general context to try and correct where we are. But who are the people that are shifting cultivators today? There are not many left. That's the usual way we are told about shifting cultivation. It has been estimated that there must be about 300 to 500 million shifting cultivators across 40 to 50 countries. That's quite a lot of people and quite a lot of countries, and they're mainly in mountainous and upland regions. If that figure is correct, and they are just guesses, but guesses by persons who have a lot and the best information available to any of us, then it is something that is significant in global terms and something worth remembering when we talk of where food comes from and who is feeding themselves. That's the most important thing today. Who feeds themselves? It's not about where somebody like us living in a city obtains their food from. We create the problem by living in large cities. Where people feed themselves, they are part of a solution. Shifting cultivators are part of a solution in that worldview. The Himalayan region, of course, is the largest area in which these people would be found. So Assuming that these people continue to practice shifting cultivation, what have we learned about them? My own association with these people has been through early work that I did in my career with people in northern Thailand. This was an area where part of the cycle of production involved opium production and corn to earn income to buy rice in an ever decreasing cycle of forest regrowth. The problem was the shortening cycle. Of course, the Western Development Agency saw the problem as the opium production, and so there was money provided to conduct the research on that basis. Much research is funded on this basis for political ends, but they meet a real well-being end for the people concerned, as did that research. I'll mention more about that shortly. But where are these people who are in the highlands? Well, first of all, where are the highlands? We can see the location of the world's highlands in this pie chart. But these people haven't always been in these areas. Many of them have been forced to live there, driven out by people in the lowlands taking the better agricultural land that provides food regularly so cities can be built. Once cities are built, they defend the system. Other people may have gone to these areas to escape cities. They just didn't want the burden of living in cities. So in order to maintain the culture, they have moved into highland areas and gradually adopted a form of shifting agriculture. A number of projects in Thailand inform what I will say. Some were funded through the royal projects of the previous King of Thailand, Rama IX, and the people who volunteered and worked in association with aid projects funded by foreign governments to help those marginalised people in Thailand. Those people were helped. But in addition, the environment was helped. In addition to that, a number of general lessons were learned about shifting agriculture. The first being that we do not understand it, because we have a worldview based on sedentary agriculture and civilization. Civilization, of course, meaning living in cities, of course, allowed by permanent agriculture. You can't have one without the other. These people took with their knowledge of fitting in with the environment to feed themselves into the highlands, and hence the long cycle, which worked for years. Cut down forests, grow crops, encourage forests to regrow and move on. After it's regrown to its full potential, cut down the forest again. This cycle, a sustainable cycle, relied in shifting cultivation having a very low population density. What has made it fail, in many cases, is rising population. To criticise shifting cultivation because of that is unfair unless we criticise everything about the world's population today, particularly the huge numbers living in cities. More of us live in cities than in the countryside. Yet we're faced continually with knee-jerk reactions against not just agriculture today, but even shifting agriculture, as we're talking about in this brief video. Shifting agriculture has been noted, though, on the other extreme by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, yes, the same organisation that provides all of the information that is so sensationalised in our press. And their statement was that forest clearing for shifting cultivation releases less carbon than permanent forest clearing because the fallow period allows some forest regrowth. It sounds so simple. Usually simple things like this are true. As we've studied science, we know from Occam's razor that usually the simplest explanation is correct, but it doesn't mean we accept it. It means we challenge it. That is the basis of science. The question becomes, do we look after forests or do we look after people? It's a genuine question, and the answer that the Western world has provided in the case of shifting cultivation is we want to look after forests and the environment, not people. Yet we say we want to look after the people. We talk of human rights. Well, if individuals do have rights, the first rights are to feed themselves. That right has been denied to people who are forced off their land to fulfill a particular ideal of just planting forest or something that cannot be eaten. Why not plant something that can be eaten and does harness extra carbon dioxide? The Thai-Australia Highland Agricultural Project, which is the subject of another small video, is one in which a number of social and technical research papers were produced which led to significant changes. In fact, it wasn't the research results that led to the changes, it was development under World Bank loans for roads, healthcare and education that allowed the outcomes of scientific research to be applied. In the highlands across the region from Thailand through Laos, Vietnam, Burma or Myanmar, Yunnan, a province of southern China, other provinces of China, and through into parts of Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Tibet in China, of course. This area has been the subject of a number of research activities. Some of my own research concerned the imperata grasslands. Now, imperata is a grass that colonises the areas after cultivation in shifting cultivation in Thailand and many other regions in the subtropics or the montane tropics, the high altitude tropics in these highland areas. Imperata is largely unpalatable except at a very young stage when it is useful for grazing animals. But it is a fire-tolerant species. In fact, it survives fire better than anything else and crowds out other species, stopping forest regrowth. This was seen as a major problem, yet it could be part of a solution. The solution that has been taken in many cases is simply to use herbicides, kill it in small areas, plant trees, re-establish forest, and hope that wildlife returns. This is all fine. It works, in fact, it seems to work. But people, of course, are forced out. And where do those people go? They have to go down into the lowlands and inevitably into the cities. So if we look at what happened in this Thai situation, the number of research papers that came from it is not an indication of anything other than the work of the scientists on the project. The value of the research is if it's applied. It has been applied, and it has been applied around the world in a number of other areas. And this is assisted by combining that knowledge in conjunction with good policy. And the good policy that leads to development has relied on real information from the research, and the development research itself relying on an understanding of the socio-economic values and the constraints in the particular areas in which it is applied. It is worthwhile understanding the science. The science relies on the historical and policy context. We learn this, we make good agricultural scientists. All of this means that nations in which shifting cultivation is practiced are not always subject to the same non-governmental pressures that are normal in more developed economies. So our attitudes are often completely wrong. If we're to get the policy right, we first have to understand high-level national priorities and work within them. Otherwise, nothing works in the end. Shifting cultivation still exists in the world. I see it existing for several decades, possibly longer. It depends whether we go backwards a little bit in this period. Perhaps we won't. Perhaps we'll stabilise. But whatever happens, there are always people. We see them as marginalised. Let's not just replace them with something that is not better and probably worse. Let's look after those people who are looking after themselves. Shifting cultivation is one small part of understanding total agriculture in the world.